The 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach introduces us to yet another incredibly cool villain group. These Sternritters had a couple of characters that really messed up the power hierarchy of the group, similar to how Yammy and Ulquiorra had thrown up the power hierarchy of the Espada. With the Sternritter, the two characters who made you rearrange the order of who was the strongest are evidently Gremmy and Gerard. Now, the amount of fan contention surrounding which of these characters was actually the most powerful member of their respective group is honestly deserving of its own video. But in this video, I want to analyze the insane power of Gremmy. It's his overpowered shrift called the Visionary. In this video, I'll analyze this shrift in its totality, from its powers to its weaknesses, as well as talking about the role that it plays within the narrative, as well as some theories surrounding just what Gremmy's ability can do. Before the video begins, only 12% of the people who watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. When Gremmy was first introduced, he didn't seem any different from the average psychotic Sternritter. It is revealed that Gremmy had materialized a Sternritter from his imagination. At the time that this was revealed, this level of creative power was completely unprecedented within the world of Bleach. The only people who had even come close to such a feat were individuals like Kiryu Hikifune, who had created the Mod Soul, and Mayuri Kurosuchi, who had created Namu. But even these examples pale in comparison to what Gremmy had done with his power. Unlike Kiryu and Mayuri, who had achieved their feats via high levels of scientific knowledge accumulated over decades of experimentation, Gremmy on the other hand had utilized the powers of his shrift, the Visionary, in order to create an imaginary Sternritter. It was a fully sentient being with its own will and powers, and according to the beginning of the Revive of Tomorrow novel, Lee wasn't the only Sternritter created via Gremmy's power. Shaz Domino was also another Sternritter who was actively trying to find a way to free himself from Gremmy's control. Each of these characters had possessed their own goals and desires and were in no way subservient to Gremmy. It makes you wonder whether if Gremmy could have single-handedly created an entire army of Sternritter for Yhwach if he wasn't locked away. We get to see Gremmy utilize his ability to create more life later on, but for now let's focus on how he utilizes the Visionary when he first appears. During Lee's battle against Yachuru, which had taken place between chapters 570 to 572, Gremmy makes his appearance within the room and immediately kills Lee by imagining him out of existence, erasing him just as easily as he had created him, and showing off just how dangerous his Visionary power is. Yachuru and Isane watch on in horror as they realize that their new visitor was sitting right on the unconscious Kensei's bed. Isane immediately orders Gremmy to move away from the unconscious captains after realizing how dangerous the Sternritter is, but Gremmy mockingly tells her not to worry because he has already killed the captains. I remember how shocked I had felt when I had first read that line, and upon reading it again I find myself still reeling from how impactful this scene was. Gremmy had already killed them with his power, and this was immediately confirmed by Isane, who had checked their vitals with her spiritual pressure and had found no readings. Gremmy had instantly killed them using his imagination, so it became clear that Gremmy could not only create life with his shrift, but he could also take it away just as easily. He had further showed off his power by transmuting Yachuru's bones into cookies, before explaining that his power had allowed him to bring all that he could imagine into reality. Now, before we analyze his battle against Kinpachi and how he had used the Visionary in that fight, let's quickly go over everything that we know so far. The Visionary had allowed Gremmy to create living beings who function no differently than the average soul within Bleach. Now, this means that Gremmy's creative abilities have no apparent weaknesses. His creations are different from the Shadow Clones from Naruto or Doflamingo's Black Knights from One Piece. The Sternritter was actually able to create living beings, and in the same vein, Gremmy was able to take the life away from his own creations or even others just by imagining them dead. Now, this fantastic introduction that Kubo gives to the Visionary depicts it as a power that can control the very forces of life and death on a whim. Now, this detail becomes more important as the battle between Gremmy and Kinpachi begins. Within chapter 572, right before Gremmy could kill either Yachuru or Isane, Kinpachi comes onto the scene by smashing through a wall in a manner that only Kinpachi really can do. The fight begins within chapter 573, where Gremmy would once again use the Visionary, but this time he uses it to create a massive stage that towers over the Wandenreich city that they are surrounded by. It's interesting to question why the stage didn't simply just appear out of nowhere and had to gradually grow out of the ground, but that's a question that that we'll tackle later on during our final analysis of his power. Kinpachi attempts to kill Gremmy by cutting him down his shoulder, but he realizes that his blade isn't able to pierce him. The Sternritter explains that he had imagined that his skin is as hard as steel, but in true Kinpachi style, he responds by slashing through his shoulder like it is just regular flesh. This severely wounds Gremmy, but with the power of the Visionary, he is able to heal himself. In this instance, Kinpachi proves that there is nothing that he is unable to cut. At the start of their battle, Gremmy uses his powers in two different defensive ways, by hardening his skin and then demonstrating that he can also heal himself. Now, before their fight had started on their newly elevated stage, Gremmy had prefaced their battle by saying that due to how little respect Kinpachi had for his power, he was going to kill Kinpachi by only using his head. Now, this meant that in this fight, Gremmy's goal wasn't to outright kill Kinpachi, but rather to create something with the Visionary that Kinpachi's strength was unable to overcome. Gremmy then switches the Visionary into creative mode, as he manifests lava using the Visionary, which comes gushing towards Kinpachi. Now, this has Kinpachi only slightly amused as he casually slashes it away. He then notices that Yachiro was still kneeling in her original position, and she hadn't moved since he had arrived. Now, this is because her bones were transformed into cookies, and she was immobile due to her fear that all her bones would break if she had risked moving. It's after this that we see the Visionary being used even more, as Gremmy utilizes it to instantly create a mass of water in order to trap the airborne Kinpachi, who was rapidly descending with a slash. This mass of water was suspended in a cube in mid-air, and aside from this, it was no different from actual water. He then follows this up by creating a massive gap within the stage that he had created so that Kinpachi would fall right into it. He once again uses the Visionary to close the gap that he had created, basically crushing Kinpachi, but unsurprisingly, this doesn't stop the captain as he smashes through the stage and chucks a huge chunk of the stage towards Gremmy. The Sternritter uses the Visionary to completely erase the rock that is moments away from making impact. Now, this is the third time that we see him use his power in a defensive manner. He then sees Kinpachi rapidly descending towards him about to attack, but he defends himself by manifesting a stone pillar. Now, it's at this time that we notice that Kinpachi was holding onto Yachiro this entire time, but she seems to be perfectly fine, which indicates one of the Visionary's only real weaknesses. Despite possessing practically perfect abilities, the powers of Gremmy's influence is limited by his attention span, meaning that the average Gen Zer would be even worse at using the Visionary than even Gremmy. Now, that's something to think about. This is honestly a pretty creative and reasonable weakness to introduce into Gremmy's ability, which is powered by his brain, and I don't think Kubo gets enough credit for this. After the revelation of the Visionary's weakness, the battle would go into full swing, as Gremmy uses it for multiple different purposes, from manipulating multiple parts of his stage to attack Kinpachi, or to manifesting a myriad of firearms, and even creating literal missiles that he launches towards Kinpachi, all of which prove to have little to no effect upon the captain. Now, there's a key detail that I want to touch upon before rounding up on all of the feats that Gremmy accomplishes with the Visionary. It's the fact that Kinpachi was able to successfully land several blows upon the Sternritter. You might have been wondering why I haven't included this particular occurrence as one of the Visionary's weaknesses. This is mainly because I don't believe that this is an actual weakness of the ability, but rather a byproduct of Gremmy's lack of combat experience. During the fight, Gremmy finds himself on the receiving end of multiple slashes from Kinpachi. He was receiving the wounds quicker than he could even react to them or heal them. There was even a point within the battle that Gremmy had accepted that his defeat was inevitable. He had started to even imagine himself being defeated. This was brought to his attention by Kinpachi, who had noticed that he had stopped fighting back. After drawing his attention to this fact, Gremmy had realized that he was in the middle of imagining his own defeat, and had inadvertently started manifesting it with the Visionary. After quickly catching himself, he had erased any possibility of his own death from his mind, granting himself some sort of a pseudo-immortality. I personally don't believe that this is an actual weakness of the Visionary, since a more experienced user would know not to imagine their own defeat. It's rather a weakness born from Gremmy's inexperienced mind, rather than the ability itself. Now, we've come to the point that I consider the most interesting part of this video, and this is the part of Gremmy's power that had sparked the most fan debate. And it all begins when Gremmy had used the Visionary to create what resembles a replica of himself, but he explains that it's neither a clone or an illusion, but rather a completely new instance of himself. And by doing so, the power of his imagination had in fact doubled. The meaning of this doubled power is a rather contentious subject, but to truly understand what this doubling meant, we'll have to look back on every time that the Visionary was used before this. Throughout his battle against Kenpachi, the Visionary's power was almost perfect, with its one glaring weakness being that the longevity of its influence was only limited by the attention span of its user. This meant that Gremmy would have struggled to create something that had required an insane level of detail to maintain. So by creating a new instance of himself, he had actually doubled his attention span, along with doubling the power of his imagination. This is further supported by his statement about how the meteor that he had just manifested would still exist even if Kenpachi was able to kill him before it lands. Unlike before, where merely shifting his attention would be enough to undo the direct effects of the Visionary. This means that he no longer needs to consciously focus his attention on a target in order to maintain the effects of the Visionary. Another way that creating another instance of himself would have helped was most likely with his ability to create much larger scaled and more complex things, like his galaxy room, since he now had multiple minds to manage the extreme detail needed to manifest something of that scale. Now let's go over the final few times that Gremmy had used the Visionary during his battle against Kenpachi. The Sternritter was able to share his immortality and invulnerability with his clones that he had created, making it so neither of them could be harmed by Kenpachi. After the captain destroys the Sternritter's meteor by using Nozarashi, Gremmy creates 3 additional versions of himself and performs what is indisputably his greatest feat. He creates a galaxy and traps Kenpachi within it. Believing that he has sealed him away to die a slow death within the cold void of space, Kenpachi reappears, piercing through the very fabric of space and cutting right through Gremmy, who had stopped hardening his skin at this point. The Sternritter then turns all of his clones into explosives and detonates them, which heavily wounds Kenpachi. He then tries to give himself all of Kenpachi's power and destroys his body in the process, eventually ending the Sternritter's life. Now, after going over how the Visionary was used, we can conclude that Gremmy uses it to manifest a variety of abilities, things like creation, matter manipulation, power mimicry, and numerous other feats. The Visionary had succeeded in perfectly manifesting several feats, so perfectly that there is a lot of fan debate on what the exact rules of the Visionary are. Earlier on in the video, we had established the one weakness of the Visionary, but that aside, the Visionary exists specifically in the universe with a set of rules that govern how certain powers should interact. And after considering how unlimited Gremmy's power had appeared to be, fans had argued whether if Gremmy's power obeyed the spiritual pressure laws that the other fights of Bleach follow. I think that the answer to this question is much simpler than we realize. I believe that while the powers and capabilities of the Visionary are essentially unlimited, they still in fact obey Reiatsu law, and as a result use Reiatsu as its main fuel, since QUINCY specialize in absorbing and manipulating Reiatsu. Now this is proven by a statement made by one of the Shinigami at the end of Gremmy's battle against Kenpachi. One of the unseated Shinigami noted that the vibrating spiritual pressure had stopped immediately after Gremmy had died. This indicates that Gremmy was using spiritual pressure as a fuel for the Visionary, which means that his powers are also limited by the laws that govern Reiatsu. I believe that the power that Gremmy's brain is able to manifest is probably even higher than Kenpachi's maximum Reiatsu. This is firstly because his imagination was perfectly capable of simulating and granting himself Kenpachi's power. If Kenpachi's power was beyond the reach of Gremmy's spiritual pressure, then he wouldn't have been able to materialize it in the first place. Now the reason that Gremmy had died from it was because he had failed to realize the fact that the body he was currently using was unable to contain Kenpachi's maximum Reiatsu. The upper limits of Gremmy's ability the Visionary are revealed within the Can't Fear Your Own World light novels. The only thing that could have withstood the chaotic Reiatsu within Hikone's body was Gremmy's brain. For context, Hikone was a being who, if given enough time, would have evolved to rival the power of the Soul King in his prime, and Gremmy's brain was perfectly capable of handling such a being's power. So it becomes clear that what really had made the Visionary's power so insane was Gremmy's brain and not the Schrift itself, which makes it even more tragic knowing that Gremmy hadn't used the Visionary to its fullest potential. So in the end, what did you think about the fascinating Sternritter Gremmy, and how Yuobak had bestowed upon him an ability that had perfectly complemented his brain? This character is definitely one that had a lot more potential within the story, and I hope that his battle against Kenpachi is expanded upon within the anime, and we get to see a bit more of the Visionary utilized, since it's definitely one of the most fascinating powers featured within the 1000-Year Blood War arc. In the end, let me know all of your thoughts about the character of Gremmy and his ability the Visionary. What do you believe are the limitations or weaknesses of the Visionary, and what do you think that this power could do if it was utilized to its fullest potential? I look look forward to reading all of your thoughts within the comments, and lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I can't wait to see you in my next Bleach video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.